Welcome to the latest episode of The Special Sauce. I'm your co-host, Chris Pedigas, and always joined by my co-host, Lee Jones. On today's episode, we welcome the one and only Anton Roe, who is the Managing Director of Halcyon Knights. Anton has spent the last 25 years in the recruitment industry, both in the UK and the last 10 years here in Australia. During that time, Anton has been in various leadership positions and has led many varied teams to great success and been able to successfully scale and grow recruitment businesses. About 12 months ago, he took the role of Managing Director with Halcyon Knights, one of the most well-respected brands in the tech recruitment market here in Australia. Anton, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks
for having me.
Good to have you on, mate.
Yeah, likewise. Good to be here.
How's the well, actually, before we do that, I know Chris gave a little bit of an intro, but maybe just for the listeners, if you could just give us a quick background on who you are and what's been happening for you over the last little bit.
Yeah, great. I think you touched on there 25 years now in the industry, which is pretty frightening, really. I was pretty fortunate. I spent the first 15, 16 years of my career with Matchtech Group, Gattaca as they're known today. In fact, Matchmaker when I joined them. What a horrific name that was. And saw that business. I was in that business. It grew from 15, 20 people through to 900 globally. Wow. Went through an IPO, big acquisition, a lot of change, a lot of diversification into different markets. Was fortunate to work with some incredible recruiters, leaders, etc. And that really probably shaped me, I think, in terms of my sort of mindset about how the industry should run or how things should be done. That saw me end up in Texas for the last year or so of that time after an acquisition, which was good fun. Again, very different market working over there. And then, as you touched on, last 10 years here in Australia, where I spent some time actually with the Deco Group, helping to launch Spring for the first couple of years when I first got here. Then joined Marshall McAdam, which we rebranded as Ember, where I took an ownership stake. So it's very different to a global corporate like a Deco, sort of being back in a 12-person business as an owner. After 7 years, that kind of ran its natural course. And then I think the opportunity to join Halcyon Knights a year ago was too tempting, to be honest. As you touched on, a very respected brand, very well-known brand. I know you've had Marcus on the podcast. Some big names, big reputations, and that business has achieved so many great things. So it was, I guess, a privilege, but also a bit of pressure taking on that role, filling some pretty big boots. But it's a great business, great people, great track record, done so many good things, and it's exciting prospect now to kind of shape it and think about where we're going in the future. Yeah.
And I think we've certainly seen some interesting trend, in particular in the tech market over the last 6 to 12 months.
Yep.
Which we can talk about. But what have you seen in your market over, I guess, the course of 2026 so far?
Yeah, I think probably the market is probably not just specific to tech, but probably a shift in what we're seeing in the recruitment industry. Just before we came on, we were talking about AI and how that's sort of changing the world. And if I look at our industry, and I don't think we're unique in this, but my kind of view is that AI is just creating a lot of noise. We post an ad now on Seek on LinkedIn, we get 800 applications easily. Majority of those AI generated. Candidate doesn't even know they've applied. What does that mean for the recruiter sitting at the desk with their inbox just filling up with that kind of volume of resumes? How does that impact their day? How does that impact their ability to get to market? So I think that's probably been the biggest shift. And for me, I see opportunity in that in terms of how we can pivot and maybe move away from where I think the industry's drifted over the last 20 years, which is away from what recruitment was about, into probably more of a sourcing role and away from being a sales role. So I think there's opportunity. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but the market, if I was to talk more broadly, the market, I would say, is fairly good. We're putting up some pretty good quarters. We're seeing a pretty good flow of work. You could say it's patchy. Companies are kind of hiring or they're not hiring. But there's certainly nothing that's sort of keeping me awake at night at the moment.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I think just on that, you just mentioned, as an industry, probably sort of drifting away. And I know we talked about this off air when we were preparing for this. Talk us through that. What do you mean by, have we forgotten that recruitment is a sales role?
Yeah, look, and I always at risk of sounding like a dinosaur. I think when I used to talk to the team about this, they used to say, actually, a 10K walk to school coming out. But I think what attracted probably a certain generation into this industry was it was a sales job. The job was about being on the phone. It was about pitching against competitors, selling your product, selling your service. What I've seen is an erosion of that over time, which is really, I guess, with the advent of the internet and then with job boards and with LinkedIn and so forth. And, I think back to the industry I first came into, it was all about being on the phone. The offices were noisy, they were vibrant, people were making outbound calls. And partly because we didn't have the information about the companies, we had to phone them and ask the information, whereas today you can click a button, you can go on ChatGPT and it will do a full background research. And to be fair, if you phone a company today without doing your background research, you probably look pretty daft. But I think that's probably where it's shifted. And I would say my view is that probably 70% of a typical recruiter's day is now spent sourcing. Whereas I'd say 20 years ago, it was the opposite. 70% would have been BD, would have been outreach.
I'd agree with that 100%.
And that's probably because of the visibility, right? You didn't have the same visibility to candidates. There's 3.5 million people on LinkedIn just in Melbourne. LinkedIn's got the highest adoption rate in the world in Australia. And it's so easy to get lost just scrolling through those 3.5 million profiles looking for a unicorn.
I didn't realise that. I wonder why that is. I wonder what it is in particular about the Aussies that we've got that saturation here compared to anywhere else.
Look, and I've got nothing to back this up. My personal view is that it's a country in the modern context that's been built on migration. So people move here, they've got to make themselves noticed. Yeah. They've got to get out there. They've got to find opportunities. They've got to build networks. They've got to be visible to get their next opportunity. That would be probably my view. I think there's almost a requirement to put yourself in the shop window when you come to Australia. I think 32% of people in Australia were born overseas. So you got to do something proactive to get yourself sort of noticed.
Yeah. You touched on before about the sales component of recruitment perhaps being lost a little bit. I think what we see with a lot of our clients, candidates, and we hear this around is that a lot of people who would typically, younger people who would have come into the industry perhaps don't want to do these sales focused roles. Do you think it's like an age or a generational thing? Do you think it's agencies not kind of, telling people that it is a sales job? Like, what do you think the blocker is?
There's a lot to unpack there, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it is a generational thing. I think that's an easy excuse to throw around. My personal view is, again, go back 20 years, we didn't have the kind of tech companies at the time, the SaaS companies and so forth, and the vendors. And I reckon a lot of people that would have come into recruitment 20 years ago are probably getting drawn towards those tech companies that have got great training programs, great ways to develop people commercially, develop their sales skills. I also think what that sector does really well is it really segments the role. You're an SDR, you're an account exec, you're a customer success manager. Whereas we sort of take, bright young things in recruitment that have got all the right traits, the right personality, the right behaviors, and then we bring them into a job and we give them a multitude of different things to do, including probably a lot of admin. And then we say, hey, it's a sales job, but we want you to sit and scroll on LinkedIn and look at resumes all day and basically do admin and research. And then maybe get on the phone and interview some of those people as well, or go meet with some of those people. So I think if ultimately you're really wedded to wanting a sales career, I question whether recruitment itself, we can talk about wanting to hire salespeople, but when they get up, the reality of the job isn't that.
Yeah.
They're not sitting on the phone, being trained how to do BD calls, how to go out and do meetings, how to close meetings. At the same time, you could argue that we've got a much more educated market now compared to 20 years ago. So the buyer's much more aware compared to the seller. They know what they're buying. They know the comparison. There's a lot of recruitment agencies out there. So maybe that's shifted as well. So it's a different kind of sales proposition to what it used to be.
Yeah, for sure.
No, we've talked about it in the past, right? It's, the role of the 360, it's almost, 5 sales roles into one, right?
Yeah.
It's just touched on. So yeah, I get it to a degree in terms of just the turnover, the natural turnover in our industry. It's always been high, right? For the last probably 20 years that we've all been in the industry.
I think you touched on it before. Like if you look at, the role of a 360, if it was in tech, it'd be an SDR, an account manager.
Yeah.
Probably some kind of like pre-sales, but like it literally is 5 roles in one. And you it's interesting. I think with the recruitment industry, so many companies have the 360 model. Some have more the delivery, or resourcer type model. And I think no one can really answer what's best, but I think there's no arguing it's multiple roles into one. And how can you be good at all of them?
Yeah, correct. And I think that's just probably where as an industry, maybe a bit controversial to say, but we're just not adaptive. We've had a way that's always worked, and also not very sophisticated. I think companies try delivery models, it ends up with the delivery person normally being the most junior person in the team. And the person that's out there winning the roles is the one that's taking all the bonus, and you end up with some kind of resentment and ill feeling. And I've shared this with you guys before. Look, I love a metaphor.
Yeah.
And my metaphor for this one, which is quite timely with the World Cup on, is if I was going to go and build a football team that was going to go and win a championship, I wouldn't hire or go and try and sign people that were just good footballers. I'd find the best goalkeeper. I'd measure their performance based on how many goals they concede or don't concede. I'd make sure that they were being trained specifically in being a goalkeeper, looking at their tactics, their performance. Conversely, at the other end of the pitch, I'd hire the best striker I could find, who knows how to put 20, 25 goals a season into the back of the net. And I think as an industry and recruitment, we don't do that. We just find people that are sort of generally good. If I think about the best 360 recruiters I've probably worked with over the years, you could probably count on maybe two hands, the people that are really good in all phases. Normally, they've got some weakness in one area or the other. And in fact, I'd argue probably some of the best 360 recruiters are probably weaker on that, maybe the advertising and the sourcing and the churning. They tend to go straight to the candidate pools that they know. So coming back to your point, I look at other industries and they have adapted. They do focus really in on hiring people around a specialist aspect of their role and measure and train performance accordingly.
Yeah.
And that's a good segue just in terms of, you touched on some of the traits of recruiters, right? And over the 25 years, I imagine you've worked with a shitload of recruiters, right? Both good and bad.
Yeah.
Take us through, in terms of your journey and guess in your opinion, what traits do you reckon the best recruiters that you've met, regardless of what they're recruiting or their desk, what do they possess?
That's a big question. I think probably the best recruiters I've ever worked with appreciate consistency. They appreciate turning up every day and pretty much doing largely the same thing day in, day out. And they've also cleared the distractions. I think in this industry, we can get distracted with the latest gadget or the latest LinkedIn profile feed, and you can end up sort of going down that rabbit hole or maybe chasing out after the next round of companies or whatever it can be. But the consultants that really focus in their time, they don't get distracted. They know their market. They immerse themselves in the market. The biggest billers I've ever worked with are normally, it used to be a mantra we used to talk about a lot back in the day, which was be famous for something. Right, they were famous in their market for doing something. I often talk about Andy McGregor from Design and Build when I worked with him in the Match Tech days, and I may be slightly wrong with this, and he'll probably correct me if I am, but he was famous for street lighting engineers in London. Yeah, I'm pretty sure of that. I'm sure, like I say, he'll correct me, but I think that's the best recruiters. I think the ones that go out and sort of say, I do all things tech in a broad reach, they're going to struggle because the value proposition to the candidates, the value proposition to the client just doesn't exist. You need to be able to offer something specific where you're adding value back into those markets. Strip away the noise. I just talked about AI creates noise. I think as recruiters, we allow ourselves to sort of fall into that noise as well. So that's definitely the trait. The number one trait is, pick what you're going to do, hone in on it, which also, by the way, leads itself really nicely to a 360 desk. Because if you're truly immersed in a market and you know the talent, you can do that. You can run a 360 desk, I think, very successfully.
Yeah, 100%. Life becomes a lot easier, right? In terms of, knowing, having that specialization, right? And I think we hear it all the time, especially from recruiters who are maybe still new to their career, maybe sort of 2-3 years in, always wanting to say, hey, I've got a really niche focus. I'm recruiting, whatever they are, and always wanting like that bigger desk or that bigger patch. And it's that education piece around saying, hey, just because you've got a bigger patch, call it remit, doesn't automatically equal more success.
Yeah, 100%. Maybe a strange story to share, but back in my Match Tech days, we launched a brand called Alderwood, which was in the education market. And within that market, we started looking at supply teaching, school teachers, and we initially focused on Hampshire, which is a fairly sizable county in the UK, but not huge, but not small. And my learning from that experience was that in Hampshire, there was only a fixed number of primary schools. And it didn't really change year to year. Maybe, none really ever closed. Maybe the odd one opened. But you could see the edges of your market. You could see exactly how many target clients there were going to be. You knew exactly the size, number of teachers they had, number of supply teachers they used. So you could actually map your progress in terms of how you were going after it. And I think where I see recruiters in the commercial sectors go wrong is there's always another list of companies to call. There's no need to really hone in and focus in. And it was always a tell for me when I was to hire new recruiters. We'd give them like a list in their first week. Here's 50 companies to go after. And the ones that came back to you by Friday and said, yeah, done it, can I have another list? Probably weren't going to make the cut.
Yeah.
The ones you never heard from again, never probably got past client 15, were the ones that always made great money because they understood how to go deep, how to really work down through those companies and just sort of maximize the opportunity or understand adjacent companies to those companies and sort of use that as a starting point.
Yeah. I think even for us with presenting candidates to our clients, you know, what is in demand is that specialization. And I think the market has changed a lot, you know, from our perspective in the last 18 months where, you know, perhaps at the moment, overall tenure is good, but not super important. I think, you know, a lot of agencies want that niche specialization. And even if you've had, you know, 2 or 3 roles over the space of 6 or 7 years, you know, if someone spent that whole time in the one particular vertical, it's much easier for us to get them opportunities than someone that's worked across 3 separate verticals over 5 or 6 years. So, you know, I think Chris mentioned before, it's normally people who are newer to the industry that really have the most trouble wrapping their head around that specialization.
Well, and people get nervous about it, right? To your point, you know, the minute that you say to someone that we're gonna really sharpen your focus on this market, the first thing they think about is what they've lost.
Yeah.
They don't look at what they've gained and the fact that they can go deeper into that market. And that's always a battle because I think, you know, consultants are always wanting to sort of push the edges to give themselves the biggest opportunity to make cash. But yeah, it's tough. Yeah, it's always a sort of ongoing debate.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to what you said, right? Credibility. And, you know, we both were sales recruiters prior to being in rec to rec and ran some quite large teams. And that, again, was very segmented, right? You had people who focus on FMCG, technical manufacturing, tech sales, whatever it may be. And for me, it's just that was always that issue of credibility. You know, how can you go see, I don't know, a software provider or a SaaS business and talk to them about what's going on in their world, and then get on the way back to the office, stop at a, I don't know, generators or a compressors company and talk about what's happening in the manufacturing sales sector, right?
Yeah, agreed.
There's just no credibility. It's too hard to be across it all.
I think the other way that agencies potentially do go wrong though with that specialization is they think about their own way of organizing their team as opposed to what the market wants.
Yeah.
So I've seen agencies that will, for example, split a desk by the letter of the alphabet. But that adds no value to the market. No. It's an easy way to explain it to a consultant for why, you know, you do A to M and you do N to Z or whatever. But it doesn't add any value to the candidate. It doesn't add any value for the customer. And I think that's always the trick when you're looking at a specialization is to understand, you know, what's the dynamics, what are the buying dynamics, what are the selling dynamics within that. So, for example, if you take, say, cybersecurity in Australia, I think it's very hard to do that geographically and say, I'm just going to do Melbourne and I'm just going to do like senior cybersecurity. Because people are very happy to have those roles remote. They're happy to have them in Sydney or Brisbane, for example. So immediately, just by putting up a geographical barrier, you're taking away an advantage in the market. Whereas there's other things like, I don't know, software developers. You know, it's very rare that's going to be the case. There's probably 10,000 .NET developers in Melbourne. So say to someone, do the whole of Australia, has the opposite impact. They're never going to be able to touch the edges. So I think it's always looking at each market and understanding the kind of nuances of what drives it.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I want to ask you about is you made a comment that when we're preparing for this, the best recruiters are control freaks.
Yeah.
Talk us through that.
I think control...
In a good way.
I don't remember saying that. No, I think control as in control of your time, control of how you're organizing yourself, control of your desk, control of your pipeline. You know, people talk about candidate control, client control, and it's kind of got a negative connotation. But ultimately, I think when you're engaging with a client or a candidate, they're putting themselves in your hands, and they need that direction. They're looking to you to advise. We're the people that recruit day in, day out. Clients may recruit 2 or 3 times a year. They don't know what's a normal interview process or if it's acceptable to let a candidate go 2 or 3 weeks without getting any kind of news in the process, for example. So I think recruiters that are in control and control of their pipeline, say control of their client list, control of their market, are always going to be a lot more successful than the ones that kind of allow the market to happen to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about visibility in marketplace, right? I think we live in a day and age now, it's convenient, it's easy just to, send a meeting link and hop on a Teams call or whatever it is. How important is being out there in market, face-to-face, building relationships?
Again, I think it's market dependent.
Yeah.
I think you get some markets like sales, like I'm going to say project management, change management, BAs. They're much more socially orientated people.
Yeah.
Whereas again, if you're working in some of the real techie stuff in data, in cyber, in development, they're probably more comfortable, more used to just sitting on a Teams call.
Yeah.
And it's probably slightly unusual for them to, or they may not be in the city. They may not be in a situation where they can kind of come in person. But I think ultimately what we know is that the relationships are always going to build stronger in person. You get much more value from that. Again, there must be data that kind of supports that the quality of the experience of sitting in front of someone. So again, but it kind of comes, and that's probably not the answer you want, but in my view, it kind of comes back to depends. And that, again, it comes back to looking at your market. What do you need to do to be successful in your market in that specialization? Not what do I need to be successful as a recruiter? And then we're just going to go broad brush and just apply that to every desk. It doesn't matter if you're placing a nurse, a teacher, a software developer, or an accounts exec. I think every market's got its own kind of unique drivers about what you need to do.
Just, I guess, tying into that, what's your thoughts on in office versus at home for recruiters? Because I think once again, you've seen different levels of recruiters in different businesses. I think Chris and I both got our kind of thoughts on it. What do you think is the best way to handle that now? And what do you think it'll look like in the next 5 to 10 years in our industry?
Yeah, interesting. I think my sense is that we've kind of achieved this status quo, haven't we, with the kind of hybrid models. I think most people are working to a 3-2 or 4-1. There's not many recruitment companies I'm across, or maybe you guys would know more about this, that kind of do 5 days in the office.
I reckon we're starting to see more.
We're starting to see more. I think what we're starting to see more of is the 4-1. Like 3 and 2, if, and again, don't quote me on percentages, but it'd be the majority of agencies, I'd say, in Australia, or at least within our client base. But we're seeing more and more adopt that 4-1 model.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of the recruiters I talk to in the UK are 5 days in the office.
Yeah.
That is the model that they've kind of adopted there. Whereas Australia, they've definitely got a bit more flexibility. I don't know what the US looks like, for example. Again, there's a degree here, depends on the individual. I think if you're bringing in someone new to the market or relatively new and you're training them up, you're going to want to have as much actual sort of face time with those people as possible. And I'm a big believer in that kind of vicarious learning. I think back to my first few years in recruitment, and I was listening to other people on the phone, how they handled a call to try and get an offer across the line, or how they interviewed a candidate, or how they spoke to a client when they were dealing with a certain situation, for example, and you kind of pick up that advice. The other thing I notice is if I'm in the office, during the course of a week, most of the team will sort of, if I'm in the kitchen making a cuppa, they'll drift in and they'll say, I'm trying to work on this problem at the moment. What do you think? When I'm at home, no one calls me. Or if they do, it's because there's a big problem or they've got something good to tell me. But those little incidental 5-minute chats, what's your advice, what's your opinion on this? They just don't happen when you're remote. So you definitely lose, I think you lose a lot of that opportunity to train and to learn. And to collaborate as well.
Yeah, it's real. I mean, I feel for agency owners and managers because, you've got to find that balance where getting your juniors in more often than not, but then you've typically got the senior people who want to be at home more, but you also need them in the office to be giving that guidance and support. So it's pretty hard. I think what we see, I mean, we're definitely seeing agencies go more towards 4-1, but I think we even see, I would say Melbourne or Victoria is a bit softer in terms of like people want to be, it is much more common for people in Melbourne, I think, to be wanting to be at home more. Because I don't know, I just find Sydney, they seem to be in the office a lot more. And, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next little while, especially with the government, putting in an election promise saying that we're going to mandate work from home, and that just throws a whole different spanner in the works again.
That literally makes no sense to me, that government view. It's why try and interfere with business to that extent?
Just an election promise that they try and get a few votes, right? So
fix a problem that doesn't exist. You say exactly right.
That's what it is.
Try and get a few votes. I think on your point there on Sydney, by the way, is what I'm not sure is if that's more dictated by the market. So you've got maybe more corporate type culture generally in Sydney, so the clients are in the office more. So therefore the consultants need to be, whereas You walk up and down Collins Street on a Monday or Friday, it's pretty quiet.
Oh yeah,
it's ghost town.
Mitre Tavern, not much happening there on a Friday anymore.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing. That's right. Nothing good happening there on a Friday.
Yeah.
One thing I want to talk to you about was just around the client relationship, right? And in terms of how deep we have to go, how constant we have to be in front of clients. You know, I think one thing that frustrates you've told me in the past, is when clients say, you only contact me when you need me.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of they see a consultant sees a role advertised, let's call them, try and fill it, but then not talk to them for a year.
Yeah. Again, I kind of wonder what drives the behavior in consultants.
Yeah.
You know, are they under pressure that their time to do client work is so limited, so they're trying to cherry pick and do the stuff that's going to lead to revenue the quickest? But that kind of notion of the slow burn, the building the relationships, you know, getting out and meeting with people, not knowing if there's a role, just building sort of personal human connection with people. I just don't see enough of it. And certainly, you know, going into different businesses that I've come into in Australia, there's always much more urgency to go and meet with people that are going to be hiring in the next sort of 3 months. And I guess I had the benefit of coming into Halcyon Knights and then going out and meeting with a lot of existing clients, a lot of lapsed clients, and saying, you know, what do you think of the business? And what do you think of the industry? Who are we competing against, and what do you like and what don't you like? And particularly in that senior sales market, that was the feedback I got consistently, not necessarily about Halcyon Knights, but the recruitment industry, which is, you know, only hear from new recruiters when I've got a job, or when, you know, you hear someone's resigned and suddenly you're on the phone to me. You know, where have you been for the last 5 years? You know, keeping in touch and sharing market information. And that's, you know, there's a fine balance, right? And I talked about being a control freak and being a good recruiter, and you don't want a recruiter that just sort of pounds the streets all day, is having lots of coffees with people that aren't leading anywhere. So there's got to be a degree of, I guess, outcome around those, or you're spending time with people that's going to lead to some kind of outcome, or even a balance. You know, one of the things that we're sort of working on rebuilding our Brisbane market at the moment, and we know we've got some slower burn customers, but we've agreed that will be 20-25% of our week will be focused on that market. Sort of 75-80% of our week spent more on the SME market, where we can get quicker returns, influence people, and probably get quicker turnaround. But if we're not doing that more corporate stuff and playing that slow game, we're never going to kind of crack some of those bigger customers that will give us the volume. And then you run the risk that you're just transactional recruiting for companies that hire 2 or 3 people a year. So that's just as inefficient.
And that's and that's the one point in terms of, you know, you ask them in terms of their client base, how many placements have you made with, you know, client X, Y, and Z? Who are the clients you've made multiple placements with? And for a lot of them, it's a lot of one-off placements. Yeah. Right. And that you have to question, how sustainable is that long term? If you're always chasing, you know, every month, every quarter, you're chasing a new deal, a new client, I imagine that's not going to be very successful long term, right?
Yeah, it's if I think about like when I was with the Ember business, but we had probably a very tight list of clients, but with big spend. And then when I came into Halcyon Knights, we had a much broader range of clients with a much smaller spend per client. And I guess there's pros and cons to both.
Yep.
When you're kind of deeply immersed with a smaller group of customers and you're doing much more work for them, how much time are you doing sort of hunting outside of that? And how much are you sort of more in a servicing mode and delivery mode? Whereas I think you've got that kind of nimble ability when you're working with a broader range of clients. What I also don't know is there less customer loyalty? You know, there's many agencies out there that can offer relatively the same thing. So is it more the norm that clients sort of share the spend across agencies? Not intentionally, but they've got different relationships at different times, which they may kind of orientate towards with the role.
In your opinion, like, how do you, as an agency, how do you stand out? Like, what do you think agencies need to be doing? And the reason I ask is, you know, I think maybe there's a narrative out there that we hear a lot that it's the boutique agencies and the specialists who are, you know, winning in market. But in your opinion, you know, 2026, what does an agency need to do to stand out, to get that work and to get a seat at the table?
So I think this speaks to where I think the industry is going. And I think it kind of maybe circles back to what we spoke about at the start, where what has kind of the industry become? Where did it come from? And you know, what does that mean? I guess where I'm going with that is, I think the future of recruitment is going to be about who you know, not who you can find. We talked about 3.5 million people on LinkedIn, 800 applications coming through. If you're not careful, if you build a recruitment model which is just around get a job and then you have to go to market fresh every single time to go and find those candidates, pretty inefficient. And the client essentially is paying to outsource that recruitment process to you, which there comes a risk in time that they can just do that themselves. So the only way you're going to win in that model is cheap. You're going to have to reduce your price. You're going to have to lower your margins. And you're going to try and have to offer the client something that's either they don't want to do because they don't want to do it and they're happy to outsource it, or you can compete versus their TA team. So I think where the value creation comes from in the recruitment industry comes back to who you know, and that comes back to being a really good 360 recruiter, being deeply immersed in your market. I said I love an analogy. My analogy for this is the restaurant analogy. You walk into a restaurant, they give you the menu. If they haven't got the goods in the pantry, you're going to walk out. You're not going to place an order. If they say, I want the steak, the chips, and they say we just need to pop out to the butchers and to Coles to pick up some potatoes, and that's kind of recruitment, right? The client gives you the job, and then the first thing we do is put an ad on Seek. Now, if I'm the client, I'm looking at it and thinking, well, hang on a minute, I could have done that. Why did you do that? Whereas I think the opportunity is the client comes to you with a brief, and you say, great, there's 2 or 3 people I've already got in mind. Let's start talking about this. And you start sharing those profiles, or you go to those people and you use that to then get to their network. So again, maybe slightly controversial, but I'd love to see a sort of future where recruiters aren't really advertising roles. We're not so dependent on Seek, maybe on LinkedIn to kind of build those projects to be able to communicate and get through people to get to those roles. But we should already have the goods in the pantry. We should know the talent. And I think if you do that, you protect your margins, you add more value to your customer. And you get to differentiate because there will always be a need for a recruitment company that can offer that. And for me, by the way, that's what recruitment was 25 years ago.
Yeah, spot on. Because I think I look back to when we started in recruitment before there was LinkedIn. You had to find those people and build the relationships. Just connecting with them on LinkedIn, which is what happens today, just wouldn't have been enough back then.
Correct.
And as you touched on before, it's who you know, not who you can find. Like everyone can find that same group of people on LinkedIn.
That's right. Or eventually AI will be able to find those people.
Yeah.
It will become, that's commoditized. And I think what isn't a commodity is our ability to already know that talent, to go and spend 5 years hanging around with cybersecurity people at CyberCon and all the events and getting trusted in that community, building relationships in that community, adding value to those people so that, we just placed the head of cyber defense into one of the big banks in the last week. And we took that role. We didn't advertise it. I went straight out to the CISO community of people that I know, said, look, hey, we just got this role. Who do you know? Who's up and coming? Who are you mentoring? How can you help me share this? They put it through on a WhatsApp group to support me out into their leadership group. We produced a short list of 5 people, balanced short list. 2 of those key people were international that you wouldn't find in Australia. And we turned that around in about 10 days for the client. Went through the process. Now we've subsequently placed it. And I could argue, is that a one-off? I'd like to say that's the way that we're moving the business, because I think that is something that does make us stand out when you can rock up and say, look, this is what I can provide you. And again, I do hark back to the good old days of starting recruitment and having a box with about 150 cards in it, where I did automotive engineering across Europe. And my value proposition was phoning companies and saying that, this is who I've got available. These are the engineers that are finishing their current projects, the ones that are coming available. They've got this language skill or this specific skill set, or they've worked on this part of the vehicle. What projects have you got coming up? And they'd give me a role and I'd go straight to the box. I'd start phoning people. There was no LinkedIn to go to. There was no job board. I was lucky if a resume came in the post. And I know that we've spoken about this. What I also find astounding is that if you go back and look 25 years ago, the average recruiter built the same as what they build today. And I made that comment to you guys when we caught up, and I thought I better validate that. So I found I've got a few old bits from my MatchTech days, and I found 2001, and this was the first quarter of that financial year. There's 27 recruiters in that business, and we build £900,000. So you work out the average; it's about £33,000 a head, so 65,000 Aussie dollars per head. That's the average now. And we're talking 25 years ago. In that time, salaries have tripled. So you'd argue consultants are now a third the productivity that they were 25 years ago, yet with all the whistles and bells and technology and access to every single candidate in the world.
And obviously with the cost per
per
seat,
seat,
right?
Yeah.
You know, there
That's
wasn't, I don't know.
LinkedIn recruiter
Yeah, it
licenses.
wasn't LinkedIn recruiter licenses, CRM licenses for, you know,
Everything.
every bit of tech, right, that every recruiter has now. So your cost base goes up substantially. Why do you think that is, though? Why do you think the industry hasn't necessarily improved, right? Because I think the average in Australia is about, in white collar, across all sectors, it's about 240,000, right? Give or take. Why do you think that is in terms of over the last 20 odd years? There hasn't been, you know, even just with salaries alone, right? If you're making the same amount of placements, you should be billing 400, right?
Because I think we've chased the noise. You know, I remember when the job boards, and I was in the UK, so you had JobSite and Total Jobs and all those lot when they first came along. And our strategy was, how do we harvest as many CVs off those job boards as we can and put them into our CRM? And then we'll go out and say, we've got 1 million candidates on our database.
Yeah.
And then we built these Boolean search tools to be able to search through this. So we shifted our model without probably consciously knowing it, from knowing people to finding people. And I think the whole industry went down the same path, really without any probably grand design. It was just a natural kind of evolution of the industry. And then you saw the emergence of RPOs and these kind of things as well, with companies kind of cotton onto that and starting to outsource their recruitment. But without thinking about it, yeah, it just eroded the value and the quality. And you talk about, you know, boutiques that are winning, because they're probably not sitting there doing that. They're not building great big databases of candidates. They're based on the old school of who they know. And they're on the phone and they're following up those relationships and making those connections.
Yeah, I wasn't able to find any data around that after that conversation, but I did speak to a number of other agency owners who have been around for a while and kind of, you know, mentioned that conversation we had, and they all pretty much said, look, wouldn't need to check the data. I know that, you know, going back 10, 15 years ago, we were billing way more than we were now.
Well, I looked at staffing industry metrics. Nigel Haas had a look at that this morning because I thought I'd better back this up just in case. And that goes back to 2003.
Yeah, right.
And what it shows is the average recruiter in 2003. Now, the data pool was much, much smaller. I think it's now got about 200 businesses feeding into that. But it was about 240. And today it's a little bit higher, actually. It's pushing towards 300 over the last couple of years. But I don't know if that's just because agencies are running a bit leaner these days, and maybe they're sitting on some older contract books with maybe not the same kind of headcount that they probably had. But I mean, it's still, probably about 260, 270, but it's still not grown, which is crazy. It is, and there's probably a lot more recruiters now in the market than there was 20 odd years ago as well. But we're just diluting things, and I think if you look at the big global agencies that are listed, all of them are reporting an erosion of their margins from the sort of glory days. And I suspect that's the reason. Yeah, the cost of doing business has gone up.
Yeah, big time. Like even just, salaries. I mean, salaries have gone up. Like, you look at what you need to pay now for a 2-3 year recruiter compared to, I guess, pre-COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, pre-COVID salaries were nuts, but even now they're pretty high compared to 4 or 5 years ago.
And I guess that and this is probably maybe where the industry goes wrong a bit, because you know, most comms models are paying out about a third, right? All up between base and bonus. So the bonuses have probably got smaller, the bases have gone up, the fixed variable mix is shifted. But you probably look at it and think, well, you know, if a consultant's billing 300, they're putting in 100, so that hasn't really changed. But it's the other cost, it's the back office cost, it's the support cost to actually run the business. I think that is where we've seen the erosion into the margins. And that's just probably eating into that efficiency.
Yeah. What is it for you, I guess, as a senior leader in a business? What are the things that keep you awake at night? If anything, maybe you sleep soundly, I don't know. But is there anything that is constantly on your mind?
I think there's always various different things on my mind. Probably just always that about making sure that tactically making sure we create a great environment where people want to be. As an industry, there's a very low barrier to entry for people to start up their own business. I think if you look at the data, 95% of recruitment companies are less than 5 people. We hire entrepreneurial people that are go-getters. And then we get surprised when our big billers bugger off and do it for themselves. And I think that comes down to a responsibility as a leader to create the right environment, the right culture, So it's more than just someone's maybe specific earning potential, but you're creating the right environment where someone wants to come and it helps give them advancement. Again, if I kind of go back to my Matchtech days, being part of a business that grew from 15, 20 people to 900, I'm not going to say this was conscious, but it was almost leadership by FOMO. Because you always knew that something exciting was around the corner. There was always going to be, we're going to open a London office, going to Germany, we're going to do an acquisition, we're going to list, we're going to do different things. And you're also around really good high performers that kind of pushed you on. And I think as that business saw that growth, there was a real stickability of people wanting to sort of stick together. And it's still got incredible staff retention. I see it pop up on LinkedIn with the people hitting their 20-year anniversaries and 25. It's just unheard of.
Yeah.
And I think George Materna that founded that business, and I think Matt Bragg that runs the business now is doing a great job. He's creating that kind of great culture. So I think, remember someone said this to me many years ago, when you run a recruitment business, it's assets with legs. Your biggest asset is your team. So look after them, make sure they're supported, because everyone has good times, everyone has bad times.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of goes through different things. And make sure that you create the right culture where people want to continue to be part of it.
What do you think in terms of the future recruiter? You look at the next 5-10 years, what skill sets or traits do you think people are going to need moving forward to be successful in our industry?
I'm going to say sales mindset, right?
Yeah.
Because that's probably how I'm wedded. But I do think that the model of sourcing and being able to find people, that's going to disappear. And I think the people that have come into the industry or enjoy the helping people aspect of this industry are going to find it tougher and tougher. And the recruiters that understand that sales mentality, understand what it takes to get immersed in that market, they're the ones that I think are going to be even more successful.
Yeah. I think you've definitely opened my eyes and just thinking more about, it's not who you can find, it's who you know. That really resonates with me for sure.
100%.
There was a quote, a guy worked for me probably 10 years ago now, a guy called Alex Hampton. He went off to the US and he said to me, it's not what you know, who you know, it's who knows you. And that quote always echoes around my head. So it's not just who you think you know, it's in terms of how you leaving an impression on those people, so that when they need to hire or when they're looking for a job, you're the person they pick up the phone and they speak to. Yeah. You've invested in that connection, in that relationship. And you can't do that with thousands of people. And you kind of have to accept you can't do that with thousands of people. So who are the few hundred people that I'm going to get to deeply know? I'm going to commit and I'm going to invest and go and build those relationships, because it will pay dividends. You've just got to play a kind of medium-term game with those things. Just
on that I guess leads me to my next question, which is just asking about personal branding and obviously getting people to know you. Yeah. Where do you sit on that side of things, and do you see that as an important part for, I guess, recruiters to be trying to focus on?
Good question. Look, I've been pretty active on LinkedIn now for about 4 or 5 years. I went through a program during COVID with Sean Anderson at Hoxo.
Yep, so did we. Shout out, Sean.
And it's a phenomenal program that he put together. And I felt going into that, I had no real framework to post on LinkedIn. I just put up the odd post here and there and learned a lot from that program. And since then, I've just put that into action. I post every day. I try to post valuable content that kind of raises important issues in the industry or gets discussion, gets debate. It's observational. It's there to try and help people who are looking for jobs or companies that are trying to hire. Don't always get it right. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But what it does result in is that I know that on a week-to-week basis, tens of thousands of people see my name, they're seeing my face, and it's reminding them that I exist. So going back to my previous comment, it's not what you know, who you know, it's who knows you.
Yeah,
it's a great way for people to know me. I kid you not, I've been waiting in a coffee shop to order a coffee, and someone's come up to me and said, "Oh, hey, I saw you did this post last week, and it really resonated with me." And it could be about my mum coming over here to visit, or it could be anything. But it shows that people do notice this stuff, and it does make an impact. So I think personal brand is just a modern feature of the world that we're in. If you can do that and minimize the time, so it's not something that you're sort of spending half your week working on. I've got it down to a fine art now, so it's just a few hours. But I would say the the result that I get from that in terms of sort of brand awareness, and it's definitely worth the effort that goes into it. That said, it's not for everyone. There's some people that look at it and they find it quite cringe, or they find it quite not something they feel comfortable to do themselves. So I don't think it's like a necessary requirement if it doesn't align with your sort of personal value set or personal motivators.
Yeah.
But if it's something that you're kind of comfortable to do and sort of lean into as a bit of a maybe caricature of yourself, then I think it's really valuable.
Yeah, I was speaking to someone the other day who was saying that, you may not get the likes or the impressions, but it's the lurkers behind the screen. They called them lurkers. I like that term. The lurkers who are the ones that actually see your content and who will probably reach out at some point, when they want a job or need a job, get a job filled. And I think even when we spoke to Verge a couple of weeks ago, from an exec search perspective, he said, look, I don't get a lot of likes from my candidate base, which is CFOs and the like, but he said a lot of them tell me, that they've seen my content and that's why they reach out.
Yeah,
so,
correct.
Chrissy, you had at Talent X, a couple of people came up and said, gave you.
I had to get security guard to block. But no, we can take the piss out of it. And I agree with yourself as well. I think, you need to be known first, right? Then you got to be liked, and eventually you become trusted, right? With the value that you add that you add to your audience, or whatever that may be. So I think, the advice I'd have for a lot of people is just to try it. Like, I'm not naturally one person who's the most extroverted person out there, or I don't even have social media on a personal level, right? Like, I wouldn't know how to do a post. I don't think I've ever done one. And at the start, you cop a lot of shit from your mates on the group text. Oh, mate, nice post. Yeah, good one, wanker. And then literally within that 6-month period, they'll start asking you, hey, mate, I've seen you getting a bit of love on the socials. Can we grab a coffee? And it's like what you said, I think, at the start of this or during this podcast, is just playing that long game. Yeah. Right? And you may not get no love, but that one candidate, that one client comes through and says, hey, I saw this post. Could be 6 months down the track. Yeah. There you go, right? Happy days. So I think 100%. It's just having that long-term mindset. You're not going to always get it right. That's life.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that's one of the things that Sean spoke about at Oxo that always stuck in my mind, that you're not trying to write a Pulitzer-winning prize post. Yeah. You're just getting content up. It's observational. It's as long as it's valuable, it's credible, it adds something to your market. Yeah. Sometimes it will land, sometimes it won't. But what I know is last year I hit just over 2.5 million impressions on my posts. And that's 2.5 million eyeballs. Yeah, it's big. And I couldn't speak to 2.5 million people in my career. No. So if that leaves some kind of impression on those people that I exist, they know who I am, they know who I work for, they know what I'm up to, that can only give us and myself an advantage in the market. And it cost me nothing. So apart from a bit of time. So I think probably for return on investment of time, 2.5 million impressions, awesome.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
I think any marketing team would be pretty happy with that kind of return. As you said.
That's right. And the other thing I've done is, I've been very specific in determining who's my target audience. So I think I sit with about 25,000 connections on LinkedIn, and something like 22,000 of those are tech people in Melbourne. I'm not just adding anyone from all around the world. I'm trying to focus in on the market in which I operate as well to try and create the biggest impact. And that's another shout out for Sean, but he always talks about if you wanted to talk to people about what you do, who would you invite into the room? They're the people you should be connecting with. Yeah. And for me, it was tech leaders in Melbourne. That's where I kind of started and just made sure I focused on that.
Yeah, we're big advocates of that. We did that program as well. And, I think we started that not long into rec to rec. And, from a marketing spend, we haven't really had to, invest too much. Most of what we've done has come off the back of LinkedIn. So, yeah, it's definitely some power behind it for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So final question, Anton.
Yes.
What advice would you have for a recruiter who's maybe just new to the industry, or maybe within their first 1 or 2 years? What advice would you give to them to achieve success over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think the first thing is be curious. Actually get out in your market and go and learn about it. And the way you're going to do that is by meeting with people, asking about what they do, how the dynamic works in their market. Don't be afraid to be that hyper specialization. Don't feel that you need to try and do as many things as possible in order to be successful. And just think about play the long game. and just make sure that you've got the right consistency of cadence around the things that you're doing every single day, and just trust in the process. Again, I'm going to use my final analogy of the day. It's the sporting one, you won't be surprised, but I talk to the team about this all the time, but I talk about the baseball diamond and I talk about the bases. And I say, there's not many baseball teams that will win a match just purely on hitting home runs. They've got to get to the bases, right? So the first base is you've got to get out, make some noise and go and get client meetings. Go and get in front of your market, that's get to first base. Second base, you've got to then convert those meetings into jobs and terms signed. Third base, you got to get pipeline. You got to get CVs and you got to get interviews and you got to get things moving, and getting back to home plate is getting the placement. But you've got to have the right volume at each of those phases. And you've also got to know where your strengths and your weaknesses are at each of those phases, and make sure you're developing. Because I've seen loads of recruiters that can go out, do tons of meetings, get jobs, and then they can't fill a thing. And that's trainable, right? That's a training issue. And that's a much easier issue, by the way, to train than someone that can't get out the door and go get the meetings. But yeah, pick your field, pick your specialization, understand what the volume looks like, and just make sure that you're hitting that consistency, and play the long game. Number of recruiters I've seen that come in the first couple of weeks, they'll make a big placement and everyone thinks like the next best thing, and then they don't do anything for 3 months because they haven't necessarily learned from the success, or they haven't put the right sort of sustainability around their cadence to get the results. Good stuff,
mate. I like it. Some really some golden nuggets in there today. So thank you for jumping on the episode with us today. Really enjoyed it. I think there's some definitely plenty of advice there for any recruiters to take on. But mate, thank you, and wish you all the best for the rest of 2026.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, gents.
Thank you.